Here to discuss the civil war as it enters its 8th year is Ambassador Robert Ford. He served as the U.S. ambassador to Syria from 2011 to 2014. He's also a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and a senior fellow at the Yale-Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. Ambassador, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time today. I just want to get an assessment from you at this stage, with more than 400,000 people killed, as we saw in Seth's report, and more than 1 million people injured. Where does this fighting stand now? Do you see it as more of a stalemate, or is there some kind of momentum on either side?
The war is a terrible human tragedy. The numbers that you just mentioned show that. Little by little, the Syrian government is winning. Bashar al-Assad's forces are gaining ground. It's a very slow process, very gradual. It's very bloody. But, for example, he is about to finish taking suburbs of Damascus that had been held by the opposition for the last 7 years.
And where do you think things move from here, or at least how any type of ceasefire can be negotiated, considering the staggering loss of life that we've seen, and when you consider that last month's UN brokered ceasefire didn't even last?
There have been so many attempts to broker ceasefires, I have lost count. The Russians are not willing to make Assad pay any penalty. The Russians are not willing to try to compel Assad to stop shooting. Every ceasefire for that reason has failed. I see no signs that a new ceasefire would do any better. And the war will continue to slowly grind on. There won't be a fast victory by the Syrian government. It's more a day-to-day, brutal step by brutal step advance on the part of Assad's forces.
I mean, you are spelling out a very sobering outlook for this country. Russia has vetoed more than 10 UN resolutions related to the Syrian conflict, and we now have the development that the White House has announced it will implement the approved sanctions against Russia for election interference. How can there be any possible solution without Russia on the side of the U.S., or at least willing to negotiate?
It would be very difficult to imagine a solution in Syria without the cooperation of Russia and Iran. We haven't mentioned Iran, and they are as important an actor in Syria as the Russians are. But neither Russia nor Iran is interested in forcing Bashar al-Assad to make any compromises in order to reach a political settlement to the civil war. And for that reason, the war grinds on and more to the advantage of President Assad and his government.
Now, you were the ambassador to this country during the Obama administration. This week, we're seeing a massive shakeup as President Trump fires his Secretary of State via tweet. How important is the U.S. role? And I guess what I'm trying to get from you is, what does the U.S. miss out on with this change of leadership at a time when not just the U.S. and Syria, but as you mentioned, Iran and Russia need to be at the negotiating table? What type of weakness is that for the U.S. right now?
Well, it certainly matters if you don't have a Secretary of State who is able to work with his counterparts in key countries, for example, Russia and Turkey. So I hope that there is a new secretary confirmed by the Senate quickly. And in addition, the State Department itself is suffering, as has been widely reported. We don't even have ambassadors in key countries surrounding Syria, such as Turkey, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. And that also diminishes the muscle power of American diplomacy.
And in the meantime, it appears the Syrian government is being successful in pushing out rebel-held areas. For example, the government forces escalated their attacks of rebel-held areas of the Damascus suburbs of Ghouta last month. If the government continues to be successful on this front, what happens next? What do the prospects for Syrians in the future look like?
The prospects are not good for Syrians. The Syrian government has almost no money to rebuild the country. The World Bank has estimated it will take $250 to $300 billion to rebuild Syria. No one knows where that kind of money could come from. And in the meantime, there will still be some fighting, more localized, but there are still places that resist the rule of Bashar al-Assad. It's a very grim prospect for Syrians.
And what about the chemical weapons question? The US and the UN have accused the Assad regime of using chemical weapons against civilians. Do you see a scenario where we would witness any type of prosecution for officials involved in that type of act at a place like The Hague?
Oh, I could imagine that there might be a special tribunal set up somewhere, for example, in Europe, to try Syrian officials, not only for chemical weapons, but for other war crimes, of which there have been far, far too many in Syria. But I doubt very much that the Syrian officials will ever actually do jail time. They will be careful not to leave Syria, or they will only go to friendly countries such as Russia and Iran that would never turn them over to the international legal authorities. So, frankly, the Syrian officials will escape real justice.
You know, anytime we've witnessed the mass loss of life in the world, people will often say, never again, we must remember. But the war in Syria, as you say, continues to grind on after more than 400,000 people killed or missing. Very important that we continue to focus on this. Ambassador Robert Ford, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure to be with you.